Hello everyone, I'm Rick and thanks for joining me. Today we'll be looking at the DA Art D39 by Yulong Audio. And I'd like to thank Apos Audio for loaning me this review sample. And speaking of Apos, I just found out that apart from their Hi-Fi sale that's going on right now, they'll be having a November sale beginning on November 10th through December 3rd with 10% off Gustard, 12% off DNA Alpha Pro, 15% off of X Duo, SMSL, Syncster, and Most Topping, as well as 20% off of Moondrop. So I'll leave a link to Apos below. So on to today's review, the DA Art D39 or Daart 39, but I think it's DA Art because they have it separated. It's a DAC and Network Streamer Plus, and it's currently selling for $939. Let's take a closer look and do a walkthrough. The build quality is great, super sturdy, zero flex on any of the panels. On the front panel, we have a small screen here. Next to that, a small little IR receiver. However, no remote is included with the D39 or the A39 preamp headphone amp or the D1 dedicated streamer for that matter. I honestly think they should have at least included a cheap plastic remote like SMSL and Topping give you for their DACs under $1,000. Or at bare minimum, publish the IR codes so I can add them to my Swivel Baton remote control. And this product has been out a few months now and still no remote available from the manufacturer. Now Yulong does state in their manual that the D39 is intended to be a pure DAC and the digital preamp is just there for convenience. But if you're giving me an IR sensor, you know? Anyway, onto the encoder. The control knob feels really nice. All aluminum with really nice texture, grip, and you feel the indents really nice. Onto the rear. From the left we have our analog outputs, a set on RCA and another on XLR, and they do output at the same time. Followed by the digital inputs, coaxial, Toslink optical, USB on Type B, and I don't understand why not Type C, and then a LAN Ethernet port. This BNC connector up on top here can be configured to either send or receive a clock signal. And on the far right, an IEC inlet and power rocker. And before you power on the D39, just double check on the underside and make sure that the selector switch is set to the correct voltage. Back to the front and powering on the D39, we see a color screen. On the top left, we see the source format, PCM or DSD. On the top right, we see no link. This will change to net ready when the network connection is established. In the center, we have a pair of VU meters. And on the bottom, we have a row of tabs. The first is input. If we press and scroll the encoder, that'll turn to coaxial, optical, USB, and back to net. A double tap will get us into our second menu. And here we can choose if we want pure DAC or preamp. Pure DAC will put you to max level. Preamp, you'll be able to switch the volume. The next tab will get us our digital filters, and here we have our standard ESS filters. The fourth tab here is interesting. We can choose to have the oversampling done within the ESS DAC chip when set to ASRC, or change to sync to have that duty offloaded to the FPGA and have Yulong system handle it. And I prefer the sync for a slightly softer sound, but if you're into maximum detail, then leave it at ASRC. Finally, in the far right, you'll see that the volume is set to -3 dB. This tells you that the outputs are set to 2.5 volts on the RCA and 5 volts on the XLRs. When you change those settings to 3 and 6 volts respectively, that volume changes to 0 dB. Holding down the encoder gets us into the settings menu, and up on top, we'll go through these quickly. We have screen set, and we can set to always have the screen on, have it timeout, or have it dim. Effect, we can have the spectrum analyzer, the VU meters, or the sampling rate. FFT is for the spectrum analyzer, our network settings, and now we can choose which services we want activated. Roon, DLNA, AirPlay, HQ Player NAA, Squeeze Lite, and Spotify. Let's pause here for a second. One issue that I do have with Yulong is that they do not return emails. I emailed them with questions on 3 separate occasions when I was testing the DP1 streamer and 2 times while I was testing this D39, and I have yet to receive a reply. So be aware of that if you decide to purchase. I did, however, send my question out to my contact over at Apos Audio, who is the US distributor, and they were able to get a hold of Yulong. I asked if there was plans to add Tidal Connect or Cubus Connect to the D39 or the DP1 in future firmware updates. I would assume that it would be possible in that it's running a custom Linux kernel. I mean, I got firmware updates to fix Spotify lossless issues on my Cambridge 851N streamer that was released in 2018. So I'd expect that to be an easy solve here. Well, my answer was no plans to add in the future. That's a bummer. I personally use Roon, so it isn't an issue for me, but the younger crowds like everything on their phones or in the cloud. So I definitely think it'd be something Yulong should reconsider. Look guys, I have to say this. I know sometimes it sounds like I'm being negative or nitpicking about a product, like in this case, but the thing is, I just want the manufacturers to be aware of the experience that a user is having so they'll be able to fix any issues that they might have missed. Or at the very least, prepare you, the buyer, to make an educated guess on when you buy a product so you aren't surprised when these little things arise. Because honestly, I do love this DAC, but I think it can still be a little bit better. Back to the menu. Filter is a setting for HQ player. The output level here, and just be aware that the default is set to 3 volts. So if you are used to your preamp getting 2 volts or 4 volts on XLR, you're going to get quite a bit louder input, so be aware of that. The other option is to bring it down to 2.5 volts and 5 volts, but still no option for the more standard 2 and 4 volts. I think if you did one pad there, you might as well have done another one. Next, clock settings and configurations, followed by language, restart, factory default, and about. That'll give you your firmware version and serial number. As for the inside, I'll show you an image from the Yulong webpage. I don't really want to open this guy up here. On the left we see a pair of 15-watt encapsulated toroidal transformers, one for the analog and the other for the digital sections. Here we have the power supply that takes that AC and turns it into clean DC with all these electrolytic filter caps, as well as a few solid electrolytics up here. Next, the power goes up to this section where it gets further regulated by a CPU. And I see 4 LDO regulators just here. Over to the right, this is where the magic happens. This is the brain of the D39. The input management, DSP, FIFO buffering, and reclocking, all here. Moving down, we have the DA conversion area with an ESS 9039 Pro DAC chip in the center, surrounded by OPA 1612 op amps. Then over to the output buffer, and this trace here probably takes that signal to the outputs, unless there's more layers underneath this board. Everything looks great. The only thing that I couldn't seem to find were the clocks. They're usually labeled as XO or XTAL. Now I'm sure they're not at the level of the AccuSilicon 338s on the DP1, but I also don't expect them to be very far off. One thing that you might have noticed is the lack of an antenna. Well, that's because this device does not connect to anything wirelessly. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. You can only access it with a wired connection. Now that isn't to say that you can't control your music from your phone. You can. You just have to have your music server or your phone on the same network as the D39 to connect to it. Now if you choose not to connect the D39 to your network, you can still connect to it with your computer via the USB in, or a CD player or TV via the coaxial or TOS link. And you might think, then why not just get a standalone DAC? Well, the DA Art D39 adds FIFO buffering and reclocking to all those inputs. And while those little affordable reclockers like the PO100 or the DOC U2 do a nice job, they don't have the FIFO buffer section. They only do the reclocking. So for best performance, you want that FIFO buffer as well. I had no issues at all playing back from Roon or AirPlay. I found the D39 every time. It never once dropped off of my network. Yulong does state the D39 performs best with its net input, and that's how I listen to everything on my DEN system. So how does the D39 sound? Well, with the ASRC setting, like a typical high-end ESS DAC. Similar to a topping D90 Mark III Saber, super detailed, quick bass, extended highs, yet not piercing. Smoother than a D90 Discrete, but with that same kind of energy. Not exactly in your face, but definitely walking towards you. But on the sync setting, things calm down a touch, the highs tame down, and the bass thickens up a bit. Still not as relaxed as my SMSL DO200 Pro or a topping D70 Octo, but more detailed than those as well. A really nice soundstage, great imaging and layering. I think if it wasn't for that sync setting, I personally wouldn't get this DAC for myself. I'd go with the Yulong DP1 streamer and bring my own DAC. But because you do get a little bit of choice of flavor with that setup, I think I would put the D39 on my shortlist if I was shopping at this price point. Now if I had a little bit larger budget, say $2,000, then I'd go with the Yulong DP1 in a topping Centaurus or a Lave Micro DAC, because that's more of my flavor. But all in all, the Yulong DA Art D39 is a great performer, and I hope to see more products from them like this in the future. Great job, Yulong. Now work on returning your emails. And that's all I have for you on this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.